You're standing in a crowded train car, bodies pressed close. No one speaks. No one makes eye contact. You stare at your phone, like everyone else, and you feel, somehow, completely alone. This feeling is so common it barely registers as strange anymore. Surrounded by dozens of people and yet isolated, cut off, invisible. But here's what almost no one realizes. That feeling of aloneness in a crowd isn't actually true. Not biologically, not psychologically, not even socially. There's an experiment, decades old now, that proved something stranger and more comforting than you'd expect. You are never really alone in a crowd because your brain doesn't experience crowds the way you think it does. To understand why, you need to go back to a quiet psychology lab in the 1960s and a researcher most people have never heard of, even though his work explains something about you that you've probably felt 1,000 times without understanding it. His name was Stanley Milgram. You may know him from a different, more famous experiment, the one involving electric shocks and obedience to authority. But years after that controversial study made him both renowned and notorious, Milgram turned his attention to something far stranger and, in some ways, far more revealing about human nature: the psychology of crowds. In 1969, Milgram and his colleagues conducted a deceptively simple experiment on a busy New York City street corner. They had a small group of people stop, look up at a sixth-floor window, and stare. Nothing more. No pointing, no talking, just standing still, heads tilted upward, gazing at an empty point in space. What happened next reveals something fundamental about how your mind processes other people, even strangers, even people you'll never speak to. When just one person stood and looked up, only a small fraction of passersby stopped to look too, around 4%. Most people walk straight past, barely registering the lone figure as anything worth their attention. One person looking up is easy to dismiss. Maybe they dropped something, maybe they're confused, maybe they're simply strange. But Milgram's team didn't stop there. They increased the size of the group. 2 people looking up, then 5, then 10, then 15. And here's where it gets fascinating. As the size of the group increased, the percentage of passersby who stopped and looked up increased dramatically. With 15 people staring upward, more than 80% of pedestrians stopped to look too. 80%. Strangers with no reason to trust each other, no conversation, no shared context, suddenly aligning their behavior almost instantly, based purely on the presence of a crowd. Why does this happen? Why does your brain treat the actions of a crowd as meaningful information, even when you have no idea what that crowd actually knows? The answer lies deep in your evolutionary history, and it reveals something profound about what a crowd actually is to your nervous system. It's not a collection of strangers, it's a distributed sensory organ. For most of human history, you did not survive as an individual. You survived as part of a group, and that group's combined attention was a survival tool more powerful than any single person's eyes or ears. If you were walking through tall grass and saw 3 people suddenly freeze and stare in one direction, your odds of survival depended entirely on your ability to instantly trust that signal and react, without stopping to verify it yourself. A researcher named John Bargh, who has spent much of his career studying automatic and unconscious behavior, has argued that human minds are wired to process social information far faster and more automatically than conscious reasoning could ever achieve. You don't decide to notice a crowd looking upward. Your brain decides for you, milliseconds before your conscious mind even catches up. This is sometimes called social referencing, the instinct to use other people's attention and reactions as data about the world, especially in moments of uncertainty. A baby does this constantly, glancing at a parent's face before deciding whether to be afraid of a new object or person. But Milgram's experiment revealed that adults never fully outgrow this instinct. You're still doing it, every single day, often without realizing it. Think about what happens when you're walking down a street and suddenly notice a group of people clustered together, looking at something. You don't think, consciously, I wonder if I should look too. Your head simply turns. It happens before deliberation, before choice. Your nervous system has already decided that whatever holds the attention of multiple people simultaneously is worth your attention as well. This single principle, scaled up across an entire crowded space, like a train car, a busy sidewalk, a packed elevator, changes everything about what's actually happening when you feel alone in public. Here's the crucial insight that Milgram's research points toward, even though he wasn't studying loneliness directly. When you're surrounded by strangers, your brain isn't ignoring them. It's constantly, unconsciously processing them, monitoring their movements, tracking subtle shifts in body language, registering who's tense, who's relaxed, who might be a threat, who might be an ally if something went wrong. You experience this as background noise, barely perceptible, easy to dismiss as nothing. But underneath your conscious awareness, an enormous amount of social processing is happening. Your brain is in constant silent communication with the crowd around you, even if you never speak a word to a single person in it. A researcher named Chris Frith, who studies the neuroscience of social cognition, has found that human brains are equipped with specialized systems for tracking the mental states, intentions, and likely actions of other people. Systems that activate automatically whenever you're near other humans, whether you're interacting with them directly or not. Just being near someone in physical proximity activates social circuitry in your brain. You don't need conversation. You don't need eye contact. Proximity alone is enough to trigger deep, ancient social processing. This is why a crowded room can feel different depending on the emotional tone of the people in it, even if no one says a word. Walk into a room where everyone is laughing, and something in you, almost instantly, softens. Walk into a room where everyone is tense and silent, and your own body tightens before you understand why. This is sometimes called emotional contagion, a phenomenon studied extensively by researcher Elaine Hatfield, who found that humans unconsciously mimic the facial expressions, postures, and emotional states of people around them, syncing their own physiology to match the emotional climate of a group, often within fractions of a second. You are, quite literally, absorbing the emotional state of the crowd around you, whether you want to or not. So if your brain is this deeply, constantly entangled with the people physically near you, why does loneliness in a crowd feel so real? Why does it feel, so often, like you might as well be completely alone? The answer reveals something uncomfortable about modern life, something your ancestors never had to deal with. For nearly all of human history, the people physically near you were also the people socially connected to you. If you were in a crowd, it was your tribe, your village, your extended family, your hunting party, your gathering group. Physical proximity and social bonding were the same thing. Your brain evolved a deep, automatic trust in the people nearby because, for hundreds of thousands of years, there was no other kind of person to be nearby. Modern life broke that link completely. Now you can be surrounded by hundreds of strangers, people whose names you'll never know, whose lives intersect with yours for exactly the duration of a subway ride, and then never again. Your ancient social brain is still running its old programming, registering their presence, tracking their movements, syncing subtly with their emotional states, but your conscious mind knows correctly that you have no actual bond with these people, no history, no future, no tribe. This creates a strange, disorienting mismatch. Your unconscious brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, treating the crowd as a meaningful social environment, gathering information from it, subtly synchronizing with it. But your conscious mind interprets the absence of real connection as a kind of alarm. Surrounded, yet unknown. Seen by no one in particular, yet processed by everyone around you in ways you'll never be aware of. This is the paradox at the heart of modern urban loneliness. You are simultaneously more biologically connected to strangers than you realize, and more consciously isolated from them than your ancestors ever were. Researchers studying urban psychology have repeatedly found that loneliness rates tend to be higher in dense cities than in small, tightly knit communities, a finding that seems backward at first. More people around you should mean less loneliness, not more. But once you understand the mismatch between unconscious social processing and conscious social bonding, the pattern makes more sense. Density without connection doesn't satisfy the ancient need your brain is built around. If anything, it can amplify the ache, because your nervous system is working overtime to process a crowd it instinctively wants to bond with, while your conscious experience remains stubbornly disconnected. Let's go back to that street corner for a moment, because there's a detail in Milgram's results that deserves more attention than it usually gets. The relationship between crowd size and contagious looking wasn't linear. It wasn't simply that each additional person added a steady, predictable bump to the percentage of passers-by who stopped. Instead, something closer to a threshold effect appeared. Small crowds, 1 or 2 people, had a relatively modest pull. But somewhere between 5 and 10 people, the pulling power of the group seemed to cross an invisible line, and suddenly, the majority of strangers were swept along almost automatically. This threshold effect matters because it tells you something about how your brain calculates social proof. It isn't simply counting heads and doing math. It's pattern matching against an ancient template, a template built around the size and shape of human groups that existed for nearly all of evolutionary history. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have repeatedly found that core social units, the people you ate with, slept near, and depended on daily, tended to hover in a similar range, small enough for everyone to know everyone, but large enough to pool labor, share food, and respond collectively to danger. When Milgram's crowd crossed into that range, something in the observing pedestrian's mind seems to have recognized it, unconsciously, as a meaningful social unit rather than a random scattering of individuals. This raises an uncomfortable but fascinating question. If your brain is still calibrated to detect and respond to crowds shaped like ancient hunting parties, what does it do with a crowd shaped like a modern city? A train platform at rush hour might contain hundreds of people, far beyond anything your evolutionary template was built to process as a single cohesive unit. Some researchers studying crowd psychology suggest this is part of why dense urban environments can feel simultaneously overstimulating and oddly impersonal. Your social processing systems are working in overdrive, trying to track far more individuals than they were ever designed to track as a coherent group, while your conscious mind, unable to make sense of so much undifferentiated humanity, defaults to treating the whole mass as background noise. The irony is that the noise isn't empty. It's saturated with signal your conscious mind simply can't keep up with. There's a related finding worth sitting with, one that comes from a very different corner of psychology, the bystander effect. You may already be familiar with the basic outline. In emergencies, the more people who are present, the less likely any single person is to intervene, because responsibility diffuses outward across the group. Each person assumes someone else will act. This phenomenon, first documented in detail by researchers Bibletane and John Darley, following the widely publicized case of Kitty Genovese in 1964, might seem to contradict everything Milgram's looking up experiment suggests about crowds pulling people together. But the two findings aren't actually in conflict. They're two faces of the same underlying mechanism. In Milgram's experiment, the crowd's collective attention provided clear, low-cost social information. Something up there is worth looking at. There was no risk in looking up, no responsibility being assigned, no ambiguity about what action was being signaled. In an emergency, by contrast, the social signal is murkier. Is this actually a crisis, or is it a domestic dispute, a performance, a misunderstanding? And critically, intervening carries real cost and real responsibility. The presence of others doesn't just provide information in that scenario, it also distributes the weight of decision-making, diluting any single person's sense that the responsibility specifically belongs to them. Put together, these two findings paint a more complete picture of what a crowd actually does to your psychology. A crowd amplifies low-cost, low-ambiguity social signals almost instantly, pulling you along with startling efficiency, as Milgram demonstrated. But a crowd can also dampen high-cost, high-responsibility action, diffusing the urgency that any single bystander might otherwise feel, as Latané and Darley demonstrated. Your nervous system isn't malfunctioning in either case. It's running the same basic social calculus that kept small, tightly bonded groups alive for hundreds of thousands of years, a calculus built on cues like group size, shared attention, and the perceived presence of capable others, cues that worked reliably in a world of bands numbering in the dozens, and that behave far more unpredictably in a world of crowds numbering in the thousands. This brings us back to loneliness, because there's a thread connecting the bystander effect to the lonely feeling of standing silently in a train car. In both cases, the crowd is real, and your brain is processing it intensely, automatically, continuously. But in both cases, the modern scale and anonymity of the crowd scrambles the signal your ancient social systems were built to interpret. You're not missing the crowd's presence. You're drowning in more crowd than your evolutionary architecture was ever meant to parse cleanly, and the result, paradoxically, often feels like absence rather than overwhelming presence. So what do you do with this information? It's not a solution in the conventional sense. There's no simple trick that collapses 100,000 years of evolutionary mismatch into a single afternoon's practice. But understanding the mechanism changes the texture of the experience, even if it doesn't erase it. Consider, for instance, why certain shared experiences, a concert, a sports match, a religious service, a protest, feel so powerfully different from standing silently among strangers on a train. In those settings, the ambiguous, overwhelming mass of unrelated individuals gets reorganized, often deliberately, into something closer to the ancient template your brain expects. Everyone is looking in the same direction. Everyone is responding to the same stimulus, the same rhythm, the same call and response. Researchers studying collective effervescence, a term coined by sociologist Emil Durkheim, have long observed that synchronized group experiences, chanting together, singing together, moving together, produce measurable shifts in how connected people feel to strangers around them, sometimes within minutes. The crowd hasn't changed in size. What's changed is that it now resembles, structurally, the kind of unified, attention-sharing group your nervous system was built to recognize as a tribe, rather than the kind of fragmented, individually absorbed mass that characterizes most modern public spaces. This is, in some ways, the deeper lesson hidden inside Milgram's simple experiment. It was never really about people looking up at a window. It was about demonstrating, almost by accident, exactly what conditions transform a collection of strangers into something your brain treats as a meaningful social unit. Shared attention, shared orientation, and a low-cost, low-ambiguity signal that something matters enough to notice together. Strip those conditions away, as most modern public spaces do, each person staring at their own phone, oriented toward their own private world. And the same physical crowd that could pull 80% of pedestrians into synchronized looking suddenly produces nothing but mutual, silent isolation. But here's the thing worth holding on to. The capacity for that synchronization never disappears. It's not a switch that gets permanently turned off by modern urban life. It's dormant, waiting for the right conditions, the right shared signal to reactivate. Every time you felt the hair on your arms rise during a shared moment of collective attention, a stadium erupting after a goal, a room falling silent during a powerful piece of music, a crowd turning almost as one toward an unexpected sound, you felt your ancient social brain doing exactly what it was built to do, recognizing the people around you, however briefly, as something more than strangers. So the next time you find yourself standing in a crowded train car, surrounded by silent strangers, all staring at their phones, all seemingly disconnected from one another, remember what's actually happening beneath the surface. Your brain is tracking every person in that car, registering tension, comfort, mood, movement, subtly synchronizing your posture, your breathing, your emotional state with the people around you, whether you intend to or not. You are not invisible in that crowd. You are not unprocessed. You are, on some unconscious level, deeply woven into the social fabric of everyone standing near you, even if not a single word is ever exchanged. Tonight, when you find yourself in a crowd and that familiar wave of isolation creeps in, try something. Notice how your body responds to the people around you. Notice the way your pace matches the flow of pedestrians on a sidewalk without you deciding it should. Notice how a sudden shift in someone else's posture catches your attention before you consciously register why. That's not nothing. That's not isolation. That's your ancient social brain, doing exactly what it has always done, refusing even now, even in a world full of strangers, to let you be as alone as you think you are. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you find this video interesting, please consider subscribing for more content like this.